In the 1930s, there was an Italian-Australian political activist named B.A. Santamaria, who became editor of a Melbourne journal called The Catholic Worker. Over the course of the Second World War, he rose to become a guiding figure of the Catholic social studies movement, which explicitly aimed to transform the ideological positioning of the Australian labour movement to suit a Christian traditionalist agenda. Santamaria worked with Daniel Mannix, a leader of Melbourne's Irish community and the city's Catholic archbishop through the middle of the 20th century. Catholicism was the primary link between these men, though a particularly reactionary interpretation of it, strongly influenced by Spanish and Irish nationalists of the era. They intended to stamp out what they viewed as communist influence on the labour movement, and ultimately to transform the Australian Labor Party into one which advocated Catholic traditionalism. In the mid-1940s, the Labor Party set up industrial groups to mitigate the spread of communism in trade unions. This was convenient timing for Mannix and Santamaria, as the influence they had built up allowed them to take effective control of these groups. Members of the groups became known as groupers. After the loss of the 1954 election, the leader of the Labor Party, H.V. Evatt, turned his attention towards the groupers. He attacked them and Santamaria's movement more broadly, and disenfranchised many trade unions aligned with it. This led to a split in the party, and ultimately resulted in disaffected groupers and Catholics forming the Democratic Labour Party, or DLP, in 1956. This split between Social Democrats and traditionalists is more or less the reason that the Labour Party were out of power federally for nearly a quarter of a century, from the late 40s through to Gough Whitlam's win in 1972. Whitlam brought an energetic yet sophisticated energy to the Labour leadership. Unlike previous leaders, he was not working class, nor was he a trade unionist, nor was he particularly interested in discussions around socialisation of industry. As such, Labour under Whitlam's leadership was able to build up a new support base comprised not only of miners, wharfies and factory workers, but also of middle-class suburbanites. This essentially rendered the DLP's attempts to influence national politics irrelevant. In step with other Western countries in this period, the Whitlam government implemented an across-the-board 25% tariff cut on industry soon after being elected. Not only was this decision electorally unpopular, but the indiscriminate and immediate nature of it arguably cost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs. This cut was, debatably, the first step in a much broader process, whereby the Parliamentary Labour Party jettisoned its Keynesian, social democratic economic platform in favour of a more neoliberal, free market approach. Bob Hawke, president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions at the time, is reflective of this reality. Hawke maintained friendly relations with the American government, and provided valuable information through numerous diplomatic cables. In The Eloquence of Robert J. Hawke, Cam Coventry states that diplomats noticed a change in union politics under Hawke's leadership, with the ACTU executive having become significantly more conservative by 1977, and therefore less militant. Hawke became leader of the Labour Party in 1983, winning an election the same year. One of the first acts of the Hawke government was to negotiate a prices and incomes accord with the ACTU, which placated the trade union movement indefinitely, and allowed for a radical liberalisation of the Australian economy. Termed economic rationalism by Hawke, this liberalisation involved cutting tariffs, cutting outlays, floating the exchange rate and floating the dollar. Corporate tax rates were slashed, and in the early 1990s, Commonwealth Bank, Qantas and Telecom were privatised. The accord amplified the role of arbitration in industrial relations, which channeled power into the hands of the bureaucratic mess of the ACTU, and away from the worker and the workplace. Hawke also wanted to bring unions such as the Federated Clerks, which had previously defected to the DLP, back into labour conferences. So, what was the cause of this conservative shift, which caused the Labour Party bureaucracy to overpower the labour movement which birthed it? The shift which led to all the tax breaks, deregulation and privatisation? Well, this was part of a broader process which enveloped not only the Western world, but ultimately also China and the Warsaw Pact. In the East, Leninism promised industrialization and societal advancement. In the West, Keynesianism promised industrial modernization and full employment. By the 1970s, however, it seemed manifestly clear that these economic ideologies weren't capable of delivering on their promises.